her husband, Dr. John Moore, for a lot of years. And she has wonderful children and very, very talented grandchildren. So I'm thrilled, Billee Moore.
Thank you, Kay-Ann, and I am so relieved. I had no idea what was going to come out of your mouth. You probably know what I'm talking about. Well, there's an elephant in the room for me, and it's this eye that I have been afflicted with now for close to a year in the best minds in Kingsport and the state have not figured out what it is, but it's not catching. So please ignore that. Anyway, I welcome you to Exchange Place. And my disclaimer is that I am no historian. In fact, I was probably one of the most indifferent history students. But you get put down in a place like this and you realize after a while these were people. Not just wars and kings and queens, they were people. And so I would just give anything to, well, not anything, but I would give a lot to be able to time travel and just look in the windows and see what they were up to. And so I guess I'm more of not so much a historian as a peeping Tom. But anyway, there are interesting people here as well. As I said, I didn't like memorizing dates and all that business, but I'm going to repeat a few of them anyway. And I think I'll start off with the year 1756. And that was the year that Edmund Pendleton, who was a statesman in Virginia, was awarded a land grant in the neighborhood of 3,000 acres. And you don't have to write it down, it's all in here.
Oh, thank you.
And so he, as I said, it was a statesman in Virginia, and a little glitch came up because when they surveyed it, they figured out it wasn't in Virginia at all. It was actually in the territory that belonged to North Carolina at that time, and later turned into Tennessee. But anyway, he had to go to court, but the court kept his title to it and allowed him to retain it, and so that was settled that way. So this was, what you're sitting on now, was part of that land grant. Another date later on, a little later on, is 1761. And that was the year that the first road into Tennessee was constructed. I'm sorry. I was doing that on purpose. The road was built because of a situation where Fort Loudon was under siege by the Indians. And so they sent for reinforcements to Fort Chiswell in Virginia. Help. And so in their infinite wisdom, they decided in Fort Chiswell to send them a cannon. And so in order to move a cannon, you have to have a 2-track road. So they surveyed the road. That took a while. And then they built the road, and that took a while. It ran along the Eden's Ridge right up here behind us, all the way to Fort Loudon. And then they had to push that cannon all the way to Fort Loudon. So by the time they got there, nothing left to save. I think maybe you'll agree that your government still works pretty much the same way. In any case, that's how we got a road into Tennessee. And that did make a difference as far as opening the area to settlement. A little later, I would say around John Gaines was the nephew of Edmund Pendleton's wife. And Edmund Pendleton and his wife had no children, but she had these nephews. And one of them was John Gaines, whose picture is on the wall over there. And so he came home from the War of 1812, and he married his sweetheart, who was Letitia Moore, no kin to me, I'm sorry, down Reedy Creek. And they got married, and he bought 130 acres of his uncle's land grant, and you're sitting on it. So when his first child had been born, about that time, their first child, they moved on to Exchange Place, And so he proceeded to do a lot of the building that you see across the road. I think of him as the Donald Trump of his day. He was quite an entrepreneur. They had 11 more children. They kept him busy, and certainly his wife. But Donald Trump only has 4 as far as I know, so it was a little difference there. But in any case, when he moved on to the property, he moved a segment of that road down to come right past his house over there, and then it rejoined its original track. But he did so to take advantage of the traffic on that road. One of the traffickers was the stagecoach line. It ran 3 times a week, and when the driver would come across the crest of the hill over there, he would blow a blast on the horn, and by the time he got down to the house, the workers had time to get out in the fields and catch fresh horses. And the law at that time was that you could only work a horse for 4 hours. And so they, having left the Old Deary Inn in Blunteville in the morning, it took about 4 hours to get here, so that was a handy place to have a stop. They didn't feed them and they didn't house them. They went on down to the Netherland Inn after this. But he had access then to the news. I'm sure everybody enjoyed hanging around when the stagecoach came in and learned what was going on in the rest of the world. It also opened up commerce because they could bring things in that they hadn't previously had. And so the settlement of this area was triggered by that road coming in. Well, you know, if you're a normal woman, and your husband comes home and he says, "I got this real great idea. Let's just pull up everything, leave everything we know behind us, family, home, everything, and we just go off in the wilderness." Now, you can't take anything with you because we have to go by foot or horseback, so just pack what you can get in a saddlebag. That's all you can take. No woman is going to agree to that has her in her right mind. So when it was, well, we can get your mama's stuff in the wagon, and your mama too, then they were okay to move. So people came this way, and the gates were open. Well, in addition to the stagecoach business, he also built a store that was located right on that road there, and so he had that business going. He also had a currency exchange. If you were traveling and you got too far from the banks where the banknotes were printed, then you weren't too happy to take them. So the travelers would have to change their banknotes as they traveled, maybe every 100 miles, so that they would be acceptable to the next point in their journey. So he made money on doing that too. Took a little bit of that part too. What was the other thing he did? Well, I'll think of it in a minute. Maybe I should think of it now. Oh, all right. He had a post office. That was it. When you had 25 families that were not being served by a post office, so you could apply for that. So he was the first postmaster of Eden's Ridge, Tennessee. So he also, while he was building all these businesses, he was also adding property to his holdings, and so he wound up with about 2,000 acres, all told. And so he had quite a range of fields and tenants. Slaves. They had both families that had lived here had slaves, so they had a big thing going here, comparatively. So you see why I call him Donald Trump. Anyway. But he got itchy, and he decided to sell off part of his property, a good hunk of it. And so he put an ad in the Knoxville paper, and it was only a month before he got an answer. John Preston in Abingdon came down to look it over. And so he came down in a buggy with his driver, and when he got here, he unhitched the horse and he rode around the property. And when he was over about Preston Forest area, he came across a tree that said, "D. Boone killed the bar. Oh, this tree 1775. Well, that was the year that Daniel Boone set out from here with 30 axemen and blazed the road into Kentucky, the trail into Kentucky, the Daniel Boone Trail. So I would assume that that was probably at the same time. John Preston was a fan of Daniel Boone's. He was already a legend, and so the story is, and I'll stick to it, the story is that he galloped on his horse back to the house and signed the papers. And the first thing he did was to tell his driver to go over and cut the section out of that tree, and he took it home with him to Abingdon, and it's still hanging in their house. There's one building that has a plaque, the bank. Well, that was the Preston house at that time, and so that's still hanging there. However, the Smithsonian kindly made us a replica, so if you're over at the house over there, you can see it hanging on the wall. Anyway, John Preston had several children, and his son James was the only one that didn't go into a profession. And so when James got married, John Preston gave him and his bride the property, and they moved down here and took over from that point. I told you it was James Preston, yes, and his wife was Catherine Greenway. So the Prestons continued to run the place, and here came the Civil War. The Civil War came along, and they were very strong Confederates. In fact, he sold a lot of his grains to the Confederate Army. But there was a mixed bag here, as you know. So a few things sort of scared him off. At one point, the Union soldiers got hold of James Preston, and they took him up the road about a half a mile and stood him up against a gate post and threatened to shoot him. But they didn't. You can relax, they didn't shoot him. And then another instance, another story that they tell, I love the stories that they told, was that at one point they got word that Uncle Dave Greenway, Catherine's uncle, was a Confederate soldier, and he was being chased by Union soldiers who were eager to catch him, and that he was headed this way. And so they sent one of the daughters out to play along the side of the road and let him know if she saw him coming, which she did. And so he managed to get in the house before the Union soldiers came, and they hid him. And if you're in the house sometime, you'll notice upstairs, although they thoroughly searched the house, they didn't find him, because upstairs, the house, let me interject here, the house over there is called a saddlebag style house, and it's got one central chimney, and it's got a cabin on either side, a crib on either side, and each fireplace opens into that chimney. But you have to come out to go to any other room, but anyway, so they had taken him upstairs where the hip of the chimney angles in, and he had his toes dug into that hip. So they opened this little doorway that went into that cubby hole, and of course they looked and maybe even felt, but he wasn't to be found. He was up there with his toes hanging. So he got away, and to continue the story, after dark they took him out and gave him a blanket, and he spent the night in a hollow tree. In the morning, they had a little slave girl go out and take him breakfast, and as she was tripping along beside the woods, which they were still infested with Union soldiers, they stepped out and said, "Well, where are you going? What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm just taking breakfast to the turkeys. I'm just taking some food to the turkeys and gathering turkey eggs." So they let her go, and Uncle Dave Greenway got away. So that's another story they told. As I said, people come to life when you hear the stories of the people who lived here for such a long time. Well, the Prestons stayed there until after the Civil War, but then they moved back to Abingdon for obvious reasons, and had a little PTSD, is that what you call it? And so they went back to Abingdon, and after that, family took care of had a son that oversaw the farm for a while, and a nephew, and then it went to tenants, and then it went to renters. But they kept it in their family that whole time. The line of Prestons continued as stewards because although the Prestons had 6 children, only one of them married, and that was Miss Catherine, named after her mother, and she married Jeb Stewart's nephew. So the Stewart line continued in Abington. Well, in 1970, they decided to give a portion, 5.5 acres of the property with the main buildings on it, to be maintained and preserved. And they offered it, as I understand it, to the city, but the city didn't want to take on that responsibility. But the Netherlandian Association was then in operation, and so it was an obvious place that they could hand it over. So it now is part of the Netherlandian/Exchange Place Association. And so we do split the memberships, but each site is pretty much on its own. So we just do anything we can that's legal to make money as well as we can, because nobody here, with a few exceptions for short times, gets paid anything. Isn't that right? You'll agree with anything I say, won't you? You have to. You have to. So anyway, that's the way we operate now. Let me see what I should have told you. Around the turn of from the 19th century, 20th century, they redid the house, that saddlebag style house, and added on they tore down the kitchen, separate kitchen, and added on a back end to the house. And now, when all this restoration took place, they moved it across the road, and it's now the caretaker's house. You'll see a little white house next to us over here, over in that direction. They also gave some money to get started on restoring the place. And later on, we needed place to park and do other stuff, and so they gave us, again, some more land, 7.5 acres, something like that. And so now we have about 15 acres, and it's well used and pretty busy. Everything across the road would have been there. All the buildings over there were there before the Civil War. Now 2 have been reconstructed. The kitchen, which had been torn down, has been reconstructed according to the dictates of the archaeologists that looked over and saw where the doors were and the steps were and all that business. So it's authentic. And then the cook's cabin was in such disrepair that it had to be restored too, and so they managed to find a cabin out on the lake somewhere that was being flooded, and so they dismantled it, and it fit the dimensions within 6 inches of the original cabin. And it's interesting because there's a fireplace inside, and then there's one on the outside of the house, and there's been no evidence that there was ever another section or cabin over there, so we don't know why, unless they just like to barbecue on Saturday night. But the rest of the houses have been pretty well maintained and restored at this point. As I said, nothing has been moved in over there that's a stranger. Over here, there have been. This building over here, the gingerbready one, is Roseland, and it was moved here when the property was to be sold. It was off on out Wilcox Drive, where Ship Street comes in. And so they offered it to Exchange Place if it were to be moved. We'd have to move it. Well, we had to take it down. We either had to pay a goodly amount to get the wires taken down in between the electric wires and stuff. But so the other option was to take down the upstairs level halfway down, just take the logs down, dismantle it. So having all these wonderful volunteers that we have, they took the logs down, and so put it in 2 sections on flatbed trucks and hauled it over here and put it all back together again. So that has come in very handy as a visitor center. We have our weddings over there, and we have a big back porch where we can feed people. We don't cook anything; we just order it in. So that's okay too. But I hope that, how many of you have been across the road? Oh, yeah, well, great. Well, you know what I'm talking about then. You can check me out if you see if there's any discrepancy with what I tell you and over there. But it's well used. KN is one of the school people, teachers, and Miss Fannie Lynn. They built, over there's the smokehouse, there's a spring house, and above it was a schoolroom, and is still there. Then the main house, the kitchen, the cook's cabin, the store building, and a big granary, which is sort of testimony to the fact that they were growing big crops of grain here at the time, because the whole of the bins there are just really big. It's like a building, not a granary that I was used to. So if you haven't been around. So now let's get to what we do, just for fun. I gave each one of you a schedule. If you look at that, we have two festivals a year. One is in the spring and one in the fall, and the one in the spring is geared for planting. And we have vendors who come in with all manner of plants for sale. You'll find things that you wouldn't find anywhere else. The heirloom heirloom varieties of the plants. Oftentimes, it's a good place to buy your tomato plants. And then in the fall, it's sort of more the harvest time, and other events. And I think they were mentioned, but I'll mention them again because I've got to say something. The Farm Fest we have during Fun Fest, and that's on a Sunday afternoon. That goes from 12 to 5, I think, isn't that right? Something like that. 2 to 5. Oh, yeah, 2 to 5. You're right, thank you. And, yeah, I need an editor in my mouth. So we have a big crowd that just comes to that. It's all free. We're sponsored by Hamlet Dobson Funeral Home, and they just provide us with what we need to put on a big party. We also have, well, she mentioned the Witches' Wind. Now, that started, I forgot, this is our 25th year for that. And I had been to Scotland, and they took you down through the alleys and scared you to death, and I thought, well, we can do that. So when I got back, well, I mean, we're in the middle of storytelling country, aren't we? And so when I got back, and Suzanne was the go-to person. You know, if you had an idea, you went to Suzanne. She would okay it or not okay it. Oh, she always okayed it. So she said, yeah, that'd be fine. So we attracted some storytellers. You know, there's a good supply over at ETSU. So we had a lot of interesting storytellers over the year. One was a refugee from Zaire who told about his grandfather, who was a witch doctor. And but mostly we tried to sort of focus on Appalachian trend things. So we've had a lot of very interesting stories, and I have kept a log of every story that's been told over those 25 years. We put the storytellers in various spots around the buildings, each one in a different building, and so we can sell 150 tickets at night, each night, Friday and Saturday night. So we divide the group when they all come, and we put them into 4 to 5 groups with a host who takes them across the road to one of those places. And at a signal, they all go in and sit down and listen to the story. And so after 15 minutes, the gong sounds and they move to the next storyteller. So they rotate through the storyteller. Storyteller stays put and tells the same story each time. So you get that variety of tellers. And it's a lot of fun, really. And then after the event is finished, when they're all finished hearing the stories, they bring them back over here to the back porch and have hot cider and cookies. So we sell out every year. We have sold out every single year, and now we sell out sooner and sooner, so you better get there when the tickets go on sale, which is at the Fall Festival. That's when we always put it. Pardon me?
How much are the tickets?
They have been $8. They may I started off with $5 because I wanted people to be able to bring their children and afford it. Now, those storytellers normally would get $300 an hour. Now they're all have their master's degree in storytelling, all of them. and they command a good, but they do it for us for $50 a night, which I so much appreciate. So I can't pay them peanuts and then charge. Well, I couldn't I? Anyway, they're just really generous with their time, and we sure appreciate it. Y'all know Katie Hoffman. She's a balladeer, and
Many of them know Hannah Harvey.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Hannah Harvey is one of them. Yes, yeah, you know what her reputation is. So anyway, that's one thing we do, and it's a lot of fun. This is our 25th year, come to think of it. And the other thing, which I hesitate to mention, is the hijacking, because we have two brides. One of them, they sort of alternate depending on who's available. One of them is she's pretty elderly, and she's timid and doesn't want to get married. And so we have to coax her. She's upstairs hiding, and we have just to coax her down when we get those people down here in front of the preacher and everything. So we have to just almost get her and drag her down.
She's always got the
to be,
She's always got the vapors.
Yes, she has the vapors. Yes, she does. Bless her heart. But anyway, that's one of them. And then other times we have this, oh man, hot to trot female. I mean, she's upstairs. When you get there and you bring them into the building, you hear her upstairs just stomping. She can't wait to get down. So when you finally let her down, she comes roaring down like a tornado and leaps on the first man she sees and grabs him around the neck. And we have to instruct her that that's the wrong one. That's the one over there you're going to marry. So she grabs him and then immediately wants to go to the motel. So,
Billy, tell them how the hijacking works.
okay. Well, the way it started was that I accompanied one of the girls, that were girls at that time, from the Visitors Bureau on a sales trip to take the word to the tour operators that we did that and other things. And so we went down through Georgia, and it just happened that two different tour operators asked if we did a hijacking. Well, there was one going on at that time, and it was something about somebody riding out on a horse and stopping the bus and getting the people off and taking them to a Civil War camp. Well, that's much too mild for us. So anyway, I thought, well, my gosh, we've got costumes and we've got crazy people here, and so we can do that. So when I came back, I went to Suzanne Burrow, and I said, why don't we do that? And she said, okay. And so we organized it. What happens is that the tour operator is, of course, he knows what's going on. He's put it on his schedule, but he doesn't tell the people. It's a surprise. Has to be a surprise. And so the bus driver knows where to go and find us, and so we watch them as they come. We were up behind the John B. Dennis and behind the gas station up there, and we can see them coming through the stoplight. So we have time. We're waiting lying in wait for them. When we see that bus coming, we get out. Ma and Pa, who's all know Dempsey, Ed Dempsey.
Yes.
Pa, with a shotgun. And I've got a basket full of props for the wedding party. And we get on the bus and we tell them that we've got all these girls back at the house, all these females, and we've just got to get rid of them because they're eating us out of house and home. So we're looking for a groom. Well, Ma picks out some poor victim to be the groom, now willing or not. And so then we give out the props. The flower girls we give them little sacks of Martha White flour to hold. Is this corny or not? Flower girls, the flower girls. And then we have a petal flinger with a basket of petals to fling. And then we have, the groomsmen have curry comb and a brush. Those are the groomsmen. And we have a ring bear. We have a ring bear. It's a teddy bear. And he's got the rings tied to him. So that goes to somebody. And then what else do we have? We have the toaster. There's a toast that's red that goes something like a toast to the beautiful bride. She has many fine qualities that should be mentioned. She can count to 20 without taking off her shoes and that kind of stuff. So that goes on. And so anyway, the preacher's there and we all sing them out. And so that's the hijacking. And afterwards, generally, they have ordered up a meal for them, lunch. You usually stay for lunch, and that's served on the back porch, buffet style. Pratt's, I'll give them a plug. They have done a wonderful job, and they are so generous with their food. They always put in enough so we can eat too, and we don't pay for it. So we really appreciate that, don't we? So that's pretty much the hijack, and they usually go on across the road then and have a tour over there. So and I don't know who has more fun, them or us. I know we do, don't we? Yeah. And some are more enthusiastic than others, but don't hijack a bus with young professionals on it, because they are so busy with their image that they can't get down and have a good time and act silly. You know, you got to be old enough. Don't care if you act silly, if you look silly. So that works. And most of them are retirees. Then they're out for a good time, and they have one. And I get messages that they've talked about it all the way home. You know, just because they're in it. That's the key, is they're part of it. So that's our hijack. And if you have figured out who the eager bride is. Can you imagine? I'll bet you can envision it now, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So anyway.
We always need more sisters.
Yes, we always need more sisters. We always need volunteers of every shape, size, and form. So we'd be so happy if you would consider it. And as I said, as long as it's fun, why not? I gave you other thing I would be happy to make a gift of one of these for you. This is what I wrote because people coming on these bus tours always wanted, what do you have about Exchange Place? So I finally just wrote what I had about Exchange Place. And so these are available, and I'd be happy for you to take one if you're interested in doing so. The other thing, for a long time, I had a tour guide service. I used to plan tours and furnish myself and a friend that worked with me as a guide. And I tried to learn everything I could about Kingsport, because a lot of things I can't remember. So what I did, because I always got caught, somebody had a question that I didn't have an answer for. And so I used to carry postcards around. And what I would say was, I don't know the answer, but if you'll write the question and your name and address, I'll mail you the answer. So ladies, if you have any questions, I've got postcards. So anyway, okay, is that enough? Pleasure to be here.